Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 279, I chat with headphone maven Tyll Hertsens about the Big Sound headphone face-off. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded October 29th, 2015. Episode 279, Big Sound Headphone Face-Off. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Drobo, a family of safe and expandable, yet simple-to-use storage arrays. Drobos are designed to protect your important data forever. Visit drobo.com/twit and use the code TWIT100 to save $100 off a Drobo Mini, Drobo 4-Bay, or Drobo 5N. And by Epson's new EcoTank printers. With Epson's line of SuperTank all-in-one printers, you can print thousands of documents without running out of ink. EcoTank is loaded and ready to print when you are. Visit epson.com/ecotank to find out more. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Tyll Hertsens, editor-in-chief of innerfidelity.com, the resource for everything headphones, and one of the most popular guests on my show. Hey, Tyll, welcome back.
Hi, Scott. How are you doing? It's great to be back, obviously. I love chatting with you and saying howdy to all to your viewers, I guess it would be.
Viewers, there are plenty of viewers, plenty of listeners, and those of you in the chat room, we're very happy to have you here. Tyll's in the chat room too, so if you have a question, please be sure to post it there. If you're watching live at live.twit.tv, you can join the chat room there, or you can go to irc.twit.tv. And be sure to use one of our screen names when you ask a question, because that comes up in a different color, and we're able to see it more easily. Tyll is just Tyll, and my screen name is Scott Wilkinson, my full name, no dots or dashes or spaces or anything like that. And if you do that, I will definitely look at that, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. But what we're really talking about today is the event which Tyll hosted and put together called Big Sound. Where's my reverb unit when I need one?
Big sound.
Big sound. Yeah, right, exactly. This was a really monumental effort to compare a bunch of different headphones, DACs, headphone amps. How did this all come about, Tyll?
Well, about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, a whole lot of new, really high-end headphones came out, four actually, that sounded really good as I was experiencing them at shows. And of course, show conditions aren't very good. So I knew I had to get them at home and to play around with them. And there was enough that it would be a pretty significant undertaking to set up a system in order for me to just evaluate them. So I started thinking about that, and I decided to start calling vendors and folks to put together, 6 or 8 headphone amplifiers and a source that would read files off my server and be able to distribute the digital signal to all the various DACs and amplifiers with DACs built into them, so that I could test these new headphones rapidly and compare them one against the other, and then also test them on different types of amplifiers, solid state amplifiers, tube amplifiers, current source amplifiers, and whatnot. And that desire just got out of hand. Really.
As desires often do.
Well, right. When you're in the place where you can call people up and get free gear for a period of time, it can get out of hand very quickly. And I ended up with, well, maybe $150,000 worth of gear in the room. And I early on, relatively early on, I came to the conclusion that it would be essentially selfish of me not to find a way to get other people to offer their opinion of what they heard. I mean, it's so I had access to $150,000 worth of gear and would come up with some opinions on it, but that's just one person's opinion. Sure, I'm qualified, but boy, I'd like to hear other people's opinions as well. And so I talked to my management, and they allowed me the budget to fly 3 people in, and we got Bob Katz, who is, of course, a famous mastering engineer who writes a column for Inner Fidelity. I had one guy from a place called Changstar at the time. They've now moved, and there's another forum website called superbestaudiofriends.com that is, long name, but a good motive. And then I ran a contest online where people would have to do a headphone review in 500 words or less, knowing that I would want people to write up their experience and publish that. And then I just opened it up to anybody. I invited anybody who would like could come up to my house if they want to foot the bill, show up at my door at 9 o'clock in the morning and leave at 5 o'clock in the evening, but have the opportunity to spend a day with the gear. And had about 5 people take me up on that. So
wow,
yeah, so that was pretty cool. I also invited a bunch of manufacturers to see if they wanted to come in. In the end, nobody did, which was
none of the manufacturers. That's interesting.
None of the manufacturers came, and some expressed interest, some even scheduled a time, but for one reason or another didn't come. And I it's just an interesting observation. I'll leave it to the viewer to interpret that. But
yeah, right.
So it was a great time. Took 3 months, but had a lot of articles. Each of the participants wrote. Of course, I did a small piece when they were there that I wrote, and then they submitted their experience in written form, and I published those. So. It was really quite an involved and information-rich experience. It was very, very interesting.
Yeah, no kidding. I have a picture of a little bit of the setup and some of the contenders. That photo is called Contenders. So if we can take a look at that, we'll just sort of see a bit of the scope of what you're talking about here. So we're looking at a bunch of headphones and a bunch of amps. You also had DACs in the mix, right, which you switched around.
Well, and the DACs were there not really for evaluative purposes. I just needed a number of DACs so that I could split their analog signals out to the headphone amplifiers that didn't have built-in DACs, or to those headphone amplifiers that did have built-in DACs, but I wanted to feed them a better signal. So the DACs that I had were the Shit Audio Yggdrasil, which is a R-to-R ladder DAC, basically. And I had the Antelope Platinum DAC, and I had the Oralic Vega DAC. And they were all very, very good DACs. One guy did try to blind test the difference between the DACs and had a mighty struggle, but it was apparent by the end that he could tell some difference. But the bottom line is that they all sound very good, very, very similar.
Mm-hmm. And what were the let's get this out of the way. What were the headphones that ended up being in this face-off, in this giant thing?
Well, the headphones that were new were the Hi-Fi Man HE1000s. This is a planar magnetic headphone. It's a $3,000 headphone. In fact,
before you go on,
Sure.
Sound Pro 69 is asking, what would you say is the poor man's Stax? And maybe it's the Hi-Fi Man. Although that's not exactly poor man, $3,000.
Right. Well, I'm about
less than the Stax, right?
it is less than the Stax, especially when you consider the fact that you have to have a very expensive amplifier to go with it. The Stax SR009 is about a $5,000 headphone. But to answer his question, I would say, and it depends on how poor you are.
Yeah.
The new Hi-Fi Man planar magnetic headphone, the HE400S. This is a $299 headphone. I'll be publishing a review on it tomorrow, and it is fabulous. It's the first headphone of a type and price that I would say outperforms the venerable Sennheiser HD600 or 650.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very good headphone.
And for $300?
Yeah, $300, and it's planar magnetic, and it's 20 ohm impedance, quite efficient. You can run it off your phone. It is an open headphone, so it's not good for a portable use, but really a great headphone for for the price. It's fabulous. I mean, even not for the price. Yeah, not. It's missing some sub bass though. That's the one of the problems with it. It's a low bass, but that's exactly the same thing true with the HD 600 or 650. They roll off below 100 hertz.
Okay. So what else did you have in this roundup then? Okay.
So after the HE1000s, there's the Mr. Speakers Ether. This is also a planar magnetic headphone. This one is in the $1,300 price range, somewhere around there. The Enigma Acoustics Dharma. This is a very, very interesting headphone. It is has two drivers in it, a fiber diaphragmed dynamic driver, and then a electrostatic, actually an electret. It's permanently charged tweeter that brings in sound above 10K. So it's really up for the top octave, and it's the first time I've ever heard a dynamic or a dual driver headphone that sounded any good, and this one sounds quite good. And then it looks like an Oppo PM2, and in fact starts out life as an Oppo PM2, but it's an Audio Zenith PMX2. It's a very, very heavily modified Oppo PM2 headphone. So those are the four. And then other headphones that I had on hand were a pair of Sennheiser HD800s that are modified, have the Annex mod. A pair of Odyssey LCD3s and LCD Xs.
Very, very well regarded headphones.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very popular. I guess I'm drawing a blank on some others, but there were a few others in there as well.
There's a wonderful picture. I assume you took this photo. I just thought it was a beautiful shot, so I wanted to include it here of some of the headphones on these. What do you call these rack things?
That's by I think it's a Swedish company, Klutz Designs, KLUTZ Designs. Okay. They're a little expensive. They're around $300, but they work quite well. They don't keep the headphone expanded when you put on them. So when you put your headphones on it, so it allows them to not have pressure on the pads all the time and stuff like that. So
not
very nice.
They come the headband stretched out.
Right. They have lots of different colors and types and leather covered and so on and so forth. They're very nice.
We have another picture to show real quick called Gear. In fact, we have two. One's called Gear and one's called Gear Lights. So here's sort of a picture of the whole setup that you had.
That shows you pretty much everything in the room. Down on the bottom there is the PS Audio power plants that are regenerating AC for the whole 9 yards. And then up at the very top in the middle behind the red stand is the origin, the source for everything. That is an Render W20 streamer, so it was streaming everything. And then behind it, you can't see it, but there's a Audio Technology Industries, ATI, digital distribution amplifier. It took the AES EBU XLR outputs from the Render and split it to all the various devices. So in the middle there, on the bottom, you see the two giant monoblocks. That's the Wu WA234. Next to it is to the left of it is the Teton tube amp by Todd the Vinyl Junkie. Just lots and lots of amplifiers. I could go through the list. The head amp JSX2 is the red one next to that. To the left of that is the Lake People. That's not the Lake People. I think it. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Then the Burson, and then the Eddy Current Black Widow, which is to the extreme left, and then farther left than that is the Bakun Current Source amplifier, which is a very unusual amplifier. So had quite a mix of gear there.
Boy, no kidding.
Yeah, if you pull back and go to the right, you'll see the Sim Audio. Keep going right. Yes, coming into the picture now underneath the red stand. That's the new Sim Audio H430HA, which ended up being my favorite amp of the group. I don't think it sounded quite as good as the head amp GSX, but the Sim Audio 430HA just is feature rich. It will drive any headphone. It's just a beast. And I did measurements of it, and very, very transparent and non-editorial. It just does kind of everything you want as a reviewer. It will drive anything and do it well. So that's going to end up being my reference amplifier for around here for a while.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah,
I do have one picture of you with those big tube amps, and I wanted to just show people those because they're beautiful. They're monoblocks, right? So there's one for each channel.
Right. There is you have to take one is playing the left ear and one is playing the right ear. That amp has a very unusual characteristic. You see those knobs on the top. Those aren't really knobs. They have there's a tube socket underneath them essentially. And they essentially rewire the amplifier. They're keys to rewire the amplifier, so you can rewire it for different tubes. The one on the thing on the left, the plug on the left rewires it for different tubes, and the plug on the right changes the topology, so it is either a cathode low impedance or high, and then high, and there's a separate key for cathode high impedance, and then there's another key for plate low impedance and plate high impedance. So it's a very, very versatile amplifier. At $15,000, though, it's a commitment that
that's a good
on
word
the part
for
of the user, right? Yeah. To having fun with tube rolling. So yeah.
Now is that 15 grand each or per pair?
I think it's the pair. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a bargain. There you go. We have actually a system diagram that you provided that I want to make sure everybody sees, because it's really remarkable how you ended up assembling this all together. I mean, look at that. It's amazing.
And that doesn't show the power. Oh yeah, it does show the power cords, but it doesn't show the cabling, all the cabling. It shows some of the digital cabling, but it doesn't show the analog cabling. And in the end, I really have to thank, there was a lot of cable companies that helped me out. Cardis helped out with interconnects and power cables. AudioQuest provided all the XLR digital cables, and then some more power cables. Also had Nordost, Nordost, JPS Labs, the Cable Pro, which is a nice sort of lower cost audiophile cable company that not very many people have heard of. So yeah, a lot of people helped me out there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Didn't you do some? You were mostly focused on the headphones and the amps, and we'll get to that in a minute. But didn't you also do some evaluations of cables and whether or not cables made much of a difference?
Well, no, I really didn't. I didn't have time. Initially, I had thought I would do that, and a lot of the cables from Nordost and JPS Labs and Y Wires was the other one. so I had a lot of cables for the headphones, but it just becomes too many permutations to do. And every participant that came at the end of the day said it's overwhelming. Even just the program that we had, the things that I had people do when they were there, it felt to the participants like they really hadn't covered the territory even of just listening to the headphones and the amplifiers by the end of the day. It just was it's just a lot of gear. So testing cables, we really couldn't do, but I could tell you this. Between the cables and the power regeneration, I think that there was a significant aid in ensuring that this system was really, really good sounding. And one thing that nobody said was, boy, this doesn't sound as good as I would hoped. Pretty much everybody came in the room and went, wow, this stuff sounds great. And, the bulk of the thanks needs to go to the manufacturers of the electronics and the headphones themselves. Those are the things that are the heavy hitters. But ensuring that there was integrity in the signal going from place to place, and some very small, no doubt, improvements over regular cable, I think, made this system really special when you heard it. It was really a very, very musical experience. I don't think anybody was slighted in any way in terms of the evaluation of the equipment, and it wasn't hobbled by the ancillary gear at all. It was really quite a fabulous setup.
Wow. Well, Charlie X is asking the next question that I was going to ask you, which is what was the musical material that you were using? But before you answer that, I would like to take a moment to thank one of our two sponsors for this episode, which is Drobo. Twit is thrilled to welcome Drobo back to the network, and they're a sponsor of Home Theater Geeks, among others. Now, data is an essential part of the modern home theater and all of our lives. Drobo is the safe, simple, and expandable solution for all your storage needs. Drobo offers a family of external storage arrays, and you can either add your own drives or order them preloaded with storage. Now, I just got my Drobo 5N, and I'm going to be using it with a whole home Sonos system, which I'm actually waiting for the Sonos system to arrive. But as soon as it does, it's going to get pressed into service with the Drobo 5N and my relatively extensive music collection that I've ripped CDs and, bought stuff on iTunes and so on. That's all going to get put on the Drobo and be able to go into any room of the house. It's really going to be quite remarkable. So I'm going to tell you all about that as soon as I get it together. But from what I've seen so far, just with the Drobo enclosure and drives, super easy to put together. I mean, this is really wonderful. If you're interested in network storage, network attached storage, or NAS, either as a media server, file server, or a backup solution, you need to check out the Drobo 5N, which is the one that I've got. It's easy to use. Just plug it into your switch or router, and you're ready to go. It works with Plex, and it's great as storage for your Kodi and XBMC setups as well. The 5N also includes a quad-core ARM processor, so you can run BitTorrent or other tools for gathering files from across the internet. Whether you've built your own media PC or you're using something like a NUC on the front end, Drobo is a great network solution to replace all of your previous external hard drives. Drobo makes it easy to set up and streamline your home media server the right way. Drobos are reliable. Data received by your Drobo and not yet written to disk is protected if there's a sudden power loss. Dig that. Drobo also has an internal eUSB device where data is copied if there's a power failure to protect against long outages, so your data remains safe. They're expandable. Add or replace drives to your Drobo with ease. No tools required. And their Beyond RAID technology lets you expand on the fly and mix and match drives. Drobos are also simple. The colored lights on the front of a Drobo communicate the status. And they're fast. They support Thunderbolt, Gigabit, and USB 3.0 connections. The connections vary per model, but you'll get certainly one or the other of those, if not more, to stream your HD and large media files. Visit drobo.com/twit to learn more and check out their complete line of products. And when you use the code TWIT100, you'll save $100 off the purchase of a Drobo Mini, Drobo 4-Bay, or Drobo 5N. That's drobo.com/twit and use the code TWIT100. And we thank Drobo very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks and the entire TWIT network. So, Tyll, now you've had a little chance to think about this answer to the question posed by Charlie X, who just preempted me, which is, what was the listening material you were using for all of this?
Well, I have, personally, I have a set of about 20 snippets. They're about 10 to 20 seconds long that I have about 3 for each type of thing I'm listening for. So there's one for treble response, mid-range response, bass emphasis, imaging, dynamics, overall tonal balance, and I think that covers them. But I didn't impose any particular listening requirement on the participants that came. They were all asked ahead of time to bring music on a thumb drive, and I loaded them onto my server in order to be able to stream them out into the room. So people were able to listen to their own music while they were evaluating the gear.
Which I think is an important point to make, because certainly when I go to trade shows and their audio demos, it's always a good idea to bring your own music, or when you're reviewing a product, bring something that you are very familiar with, because then you can sort of tell what a particular product is doing. So I think it was great of you to invite people to bring their own stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just no reason almost to listen to something that you're not familiar with when you're evaluating gear, because what's on the recording itself and what is it that the gear is doing to it. So yeah, it's very, very important to have a set of test tracks that you know and love. Well,
right.
I'm not sure about the love part, because whatever you use for a test track, you're not going to want to listen to it again if you use it all the time.
Because and this is a good question for you as a reviewer. If you use the same track over and over and over, you get kind of sick of it after a while, even if it's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple test tracks that I just I can't really listen to. Well, and that's the advantage of these little 10-second things. And by the way, that was independently verified to me by Sean Olive, who's the head researcher at Harman International.
Right.
When they do blind testing, they use short snippets that loop. And that way what happens is you can get a piece of music that the sonic content is the sort of very similar throughout that maybe 2 bars of music, and it loops. And that way you can switch between things and do that stuff and always have exactly the same kind of material going on. A lot of times if you're testing gear with an entire track, you'll switch the headphones and you'll end up with a different part of the music. It changes its character or something like that.
It'll be quieter or louder. It'll be different instrumentation by that point, or whatever.
Right. So I find, and Sean Olive would encourage people to use for test tracks 10, 20-second snippets. I think he had a number like 15 seconds is as long as it should be. Some of mine are a little bit longer, but at any rate, I would encourage people to get a set of test tracks that for various aspects, as I mentioned. That they use. It's really annoying, though, when I go to trade shows, I sit down and I said, can I put this CD in? And people, they say, sure, and then the first thing that comes on is Pink Noise, and then, and then these little 10-second things, and I skip through, there's like 15, 20 tracks there, and I'll skip through them real fast. I go, okay, thank you very much, and I was sitting in the front of the presenter for 5 minutes max, and I know what I need to know pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the like, where did you get some of these snippets? I mean, I don't want you to necessarily name them all, but I assume there's a symphonic track, maybe. What was that? And maybe some rock track. Got a couple of examples of the kind of music?
Well, one of them, what for mid-range, for example, is the a cappella Persuasions on Chesky. One of them is Linda Ronstadt and the Nelson Riddle Orchestra.
Oh, beautiful! Wow, yeah, for female voice.
Yeah, for the female voice, and one of them is Anna Karam on the telephone song from
she's great.
Chesky Records again. Yeah. I find it really. I find it really, really important to use vocals in for evaluations for part of your evaluative time because as humans we're very, very accustomed to what the sound of a voice is, and using vocals when you test stuff allows you to, I think, do a much better job of hearing what's going on in the mid range and the lower treble area.
Isn't that interesting? Because I think that's a very tight correlation with. As a video reviewer, I look very carefully and make sure I have a lot of content with human faces to look for skin tones. Because, again, we as humans are very sensitive to that. Yeah. And so looking at a video display, how natural, how realistic does it look? Similarly to what you're saying, how natural and realistic does a recording of a vocal performance sound as a really good indicator of the quality of the reproduction?
Yeah, I agree entirely. When I edit my photographs, I always look at skin tones. It's very easy to see if it's, that's a little green or that's a little pink, Exactly. And the color temperature, it's very much easier to use skin tones than almost anything else.
Well, here the Gem Doctor has a great comment, which I actually abide by sometimes. The best way to make a test track that is definitive and you can listen to over and over is to record yourself playing. Now, I've recorded a number of albums, and I often do take those with me because I know exactly how they're supposed to sound because I recorded them, I mixed them, so obviously if you're not a musician, you don't have the capability of recording something yourself. You can't do it. But if you are a musician and you can record something of yourself, high quality recording, it also requires. You can't just, throw it onto a cassette or something and expect to hear something good that way. But, that's a good point. Gem Doctor.
I agree. That's it. That is a very good point. I play the ukulele pretty poorly, and unfortunately, it's got a bandwidth of about that wide.
Yeah.
But I know that John Atkinson says the same thing. In essence, because he's done a lot of recordings and knows his own recordings very well. And when Bob Katz came up to the Big Sound, he brought a bunch of tracks that he had recorded, which of course he knows very intimately. So yeah, absolutely. If you can pierce through the veil that far and get to something that you were there at the original event, that's absolutely a great way to have a track.
Yeah, I want to talk about Bob Katz here in a minute, but first let's get to a couple questions here. iPhone 49228 says, to test high frequencies, I love to use Godzilla 1998 and the tornado blast roar. That's a pretty good idea there.
Yeah, sure. One thing that I've heard people say, there are a couple of people that I trust their ears, they use tracks that don't have good fidelity to test things because because they know the error on the track, and then when you listen to something, you can tell how much it's exaggerating or desensitizing to the error.
Hiding the error, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a track that's kind of like that. It's I think it's Tiger Okoshi, the trumpet player, Japanese trumpet player and band leader. It's a big band, and he's one of the tracks that I have. And there's a trumpet that it's just a little bit piercing, and it's just a little bit. And so a system that's working right and transparent, it will be a little bit grinding on you. And and if I find that goes away, then I also usually end up finding that the system is rolled off in some way, so or not quick enough. Yeah.
Well, actually, UJ brings up an interesting point that's sort of related to that. How do you test for listener fatigue and comfort? Don't they require extended listening sessions? Extended listening sessions aren't necessarily conducive to listening over long periods of time. And these people were there for the whole day, basically, listening to stuff. How did you deal with listener fatigue?
Well, first of all, they were enthusiasts in a room with $150,000 worth of gear in it, so they were pretty excited. They weren't very fatigued.
Yeah. Okay, I got you there.
On the other hand, that much gear in that small a room that doesn't have air conditioning in it, it got pretty hot. So there was some heat exhaustion going on sometimes. It's a good question though for a reviewer, because as you know, you have to go through gear pretty quick, and it's hard to get long periods of ears on time. So even as a reviewer, I sometimes have problems with what's the long-term comfortability of this, long-term listening. I mean, I do listen for long periods of time with headphones, but not your brain breaks in, and so for that really to happen, you have to listen to a particular headphone or a particular speaker for many, many, many hours, tens of hours, to the exclusion of all other headphones or speakers, in order for your brain to really adapt to them, to find out. And that's almost impossible for me to do. I can't get 40 hours of listening on one pair of headphones without listening to other pairs of headphones.
Yeah.
So there's some problems there. And similarly, product reliability is another one that reviewers would have a hard time, having definitive answers on.
I have that same problem reviewing TVs, because I get a TV in, I review it, I calibrate it, I live with it for some weeks, but not certainly for months or years, when reliability issues might, in fact, rear their ugly head. So I imagine the same thing is true in audio reviewing as well.
Yeah, and in headphone reviewing, you have this added issue that the headphone is worn, so it gets physically handled a lot, and reliability issues can be serious and missed by me. So that's a tough one. It's nothing I can do about it really, but that's a tough one.
It's the nature of the beast. Barfel has been posting this question a couple times, so I'd like to get it in here. It's not directly related to the Big Sound event. Do you have any advice for integrating a headphone amp into a pre-pro setup, a preamp processor setup? My pre-pro has a headphone jack, but it's a long way from, the best quality.
I guess I'm not sure what a pre-pro is.
Oh, yeah, well, you're an audio guy, so if you, a pre-pro is like the front end of an AV receiver. It's the thing that brings in all the signals, processes Dolby Vision or Dolby Atmos, Dolby Digital, DTS, and so on, and sends the signal out to the amplifier. In the case of an AVR, the amplifiers are built into the same box. In the case of a real pre-pro, it's a separate box, and the amplifier is a separate box.
Do they have a non volume adjustable line output from the preamp that's switched with the preamp?
Typically, yes.
Yeah, and if so, that would be the place to take a feed to the headphone amp, I would think.
Let the headphone amp do the volume rather than the pre-pro itself.
Right. You want to be full height signal, not attenuated in any way if possible. Right. Okay. Well, you mentioned Bob Katz, who was there, and he's a very famous mastering engineer. In fact, I've got a message out to him. Hopefully he'll consider coming on, being a guest on this show. But charming guy.
Nice guy, definitely. And certainly, he's worked with some of the greats, and he did a lot of mastering. He brought a lot of his material that he had actually worked on. So like we were talking about before, he really knew that stuff very intimately. We have a couple pictures of him, actually. The first one is him just sort of blissing out, it looks like to me. He was digging it.
Yeah, he had a great time. Yeah. He was the thing that was fascinating about him was that he brought a whole nother it's like a culture. When the enthusiasts came in for listens, that was one thing. But when Bob came in, he brought a bunch of gear with him. He brought his own DIY headphone amplifier, an M3 that T-Can designed over at AMB. He brought a digital analog converter that he personally uses in his setup. He brought his own Stax headphones. It was very interesting to see him go through the process. He was very interested in whether he could equalize headphones successful, and we spent a day equalizing headphones. There he is. We were working on, we took measurements of the headphone and then tried to EQ them to match the Harman target response curve that's being developed. He was very happy to go through that experience. And in fact, I think he learned something that I have just recently been learning, which is that in the frequency response range between about 200 hertz and let's say 800 hertz, most headphones that are good are flat as measure flat on a head in that frequency response range. And the Harman response curve suggests that range from about 200 to 1K should have a gentle 2 dB roughly rise, and then it rises fast to compensate for conscious stuff that is a whole separate thing. But so I had been playing around with that, and I've come to the conclusion that that 2 dB rise is better. It brings the vocals more forward. It causes things to sound less veiled. There's a better sense of integration between, the spittle sounds in your throat and the chest and the nasal sounds and all that kind of stuff seem to be more coherent and integrated when that rise is there as measured on headphones. And so I talked to Bob about that, and we made sure that was in there, and he played around with that rise and came to the conclusion, that actually does sound more correct. And he had already done a significant amount of EQing with headphones that he knew and didn't come to the conclusion that rise was there, didn't think about it. It was sort of, why would you put a rise in there? But
I was thinking, especially for a mastering engineer, he would want as neutral, as flat a response as possible to hear what's going on in his mix or in his master.
Well, again, remember, we're talking about as measured with a head, which means that it's flat won't look flat. Neutral has bumps and wiggles in it due to reflections off your ears and your body and all sorts of things. So if you put a body in front of a speaker and measure how flat it is at your eardrum, it's not flat at all. It has a lot of bumps and wiggles. For example, at 2K, it'll be some 2.5K, it'll be some 12 dB above the sound level in other areas. And of course,
12 dB, that's a lot.
Yeah. Well, and Mother Nature did that for us. The sound from the outside world gets amplified in that region, in that between, let's say, 1K and 5 or 6K.
Right.
In that region,
the primary speech region. That's the primary speech region.
And it's the sound that a twig makes when it breaks underfoot, which is what you want to be aware of. So
Yeah. And by speech, I mean particularly the consonants.
Right,
Intelligibility.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And intelligibility rides on the consonants, not on the vowels.
Right.
So that's one reason why Mother Nature gave us a heightened sensitivity in that region, so we could hear and understand what people were saying. But also, as you say, to hear the twig snap behind us when the saber-toothed tiger is about to pounce.
Yeah, that probably came before speech.
Yeah, probably did. I would guess so. Jet Lawyer is saying lizard brain. That's probably where that came from originally. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what other kind of anecdote? Oh, you know what? Before we get to that, I'm going to ask you about some of the interesting things that happened. But before I do have one more sponsor to thank for this episode, which is Epson. Epson's revolutionary EcoTank line of printers for home and office introduce a new age in printing. Dig this. The new EcoTank ET4550 wireless all-in-one printer doesn't use ink cartridges. Instead, it features an innovative refillable ink tank. It comes with enough ink to print up to 8,500 pages, equivalent to about 50 ink cartridge sets. You're loaded and ready to print for up to 2 years. Powered by Epson's leading-edge precision core technology, it delivers high-speed, vivid colors and laser-quality black text, plus auto two-sided printing, 30-page auto document feeder, and easy wireless printing from tablets and smartphones. All EcoTank printers deliver an unbeatable combination of convenience and value with ultra-low-cost replacement ink bottles. Now you have the freedom to print without running out of ink. Visit Epson.com/EcoTank today to transform the way your home, office, or work group prints. For the best combination of ease and value, turn to the new Epson EcoTank printers. That's epson.com/EcoTank, ECO, EcoTank. And we thank Epson very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Epson, exceed your vision. So, Tyll, we're talking about the Big Sound event, comparing a bunch of headphones, a bunch of amps in this massive system that you put together that was very impressive and apparently impressed everybody who was there. I'd love to hear a few sort of anecdotes of people who were there and what they did and what they heard and what they said about it.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's probably worthwhile saying that once I came to the conclusion that people would be coming in to visit, and I figured I need to have some kind of a program that they went through to sort of organize it in thought. And so every participant that came first did some blind testing. So we had a little blind testing session early in the in the morning when they first came, and then after that, their task was to tell me their 3 favorite headphones of the bunch, and then which amplifiers they liked most with those headphones.
And they were able to switch headphones to amps using some of this gear that you had set up?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, the biggest difference between the sounds that people would hear were due to the headphones themselves. I mean, 90% of the difference that you heard was the headphones themselves. The amplifiers, I mean, a competent amplifier, which almost all of them were, and I could tell you about what the one that really was a kind of a flyer, but for the most part, all the amps were very competent amplifiers, which means that they did a very good job of being flat and so on and so forth. So the character of the amplifiers didn't really make that much difference on the character of the headphones themselves. So when people were evaluating the headphones, they could have each headphone plugged into a different amplifier, and then I had a little jig to volume match them if they wanted, and then they could go very quickly from one headphone to the next. And most of the difference that they were hearing was due to the headphones themselves. So it's pretty straightforward to listen to the headphones, just go down the row. And then once they settled on what they thought the headphones were like, then they could take one headphone and then plug it into different amplifiers to evaluate how the amplifiers changed the sound. And of course, it was a relatively small change to the difference between the headphones. But so one of the things that was interesting was the whole blind testing thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wrote a lot about this that it would take a whole hour just to talk about it. But you can look up there's an article about the blind testing experience and what the importance of small differences are. But I did the blind testing session mainly to push the reset button on people's brain. So I'll give you, for instance, one of the people, and I won't call that one person out relative to everybody else because there's sort of similar stories. But one guy that came in, and he was all excited, of course, and sort of expect that. And he started just talking about the characteristics of the various pieces of gear from all his experience of reading online. So he walked in the door having all sorts of expectations. And of course, expectations is the enemy of evaluative listening, because you're going to expect one thing to sound a certain way. Well, your brain's going to try to help you out if it can.
Yes.
Well, anyway, so he came in and he was all excited and stuff like that. And he says, well, first we're going to do this blind testing thing. And he sat down to do it and started switching the box around. I should explain that I had 3 amplifiers that I could wire to a switch box, and I could change which switch position was which amplifier. And so he sat down and we started this process where he would switch between. And at first, you would tell them which amplifier was on which setting so they could learn the sound. And so he sat down and he started listening, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, there's no difference, hardly at all." And he said, and these were the headphones. I had the HE1000s on them. He said, these were the headphones I so wanted to listen to, and they just sound like headphones. And I go, well, yeah, they're headphones. But he was expecting a miracle because of all the gushing words that he'd heard about it over the internet, you know. And so that blind testing session did a really great job of resetting people's buttons, of understanding that the differences, you know, there isn't huge differences between amplifiers. And that's the point I wanted to make with that blind testing was, look, there's not a huge difference between amplifiers. You're going to have to listen carefully, and you're going to have to listen for subtleties and things like that. Anyway, it was great fun. Certainly, some people did better than others on the blind testing, and there seemed to be a correlation between my opinion and how well, and their opinions, depending on how well they did on the test. The guy who did the best on the tests, his opinions were really spot on in my view. So
wow.
So there is a relationship there.
That's good that you got some validation, you know, that you're sitting there listening in isolation all by yourself, right, and you're right about it and so on. And you're an experienced listener, and people should definitely take what you say about headphones very seriously. But it must have felt great to have just a bunch of guys come in. I assume they were all guys. And listen and sort of, you know, come to similar conclusions as you.
Well, and that actually brings up yes, it did, but that actually brings up a really, really interesting point in this all, which is that so a little detail on the blind testing. I used a current source amplifier, the Bakun, a tube amplifier, the Todd the Vinyl Junkie Teton, and a solid state amplifier, the Moon 430HA. And each of these amplifiers has a very, very different output impedance and characteristics. So they interact strongly with impedance characteristics of the headphones. And people could tell the Bakun very easily with the Sennheiser HD800 because it has a big impedance bump at 80 hertz, and for technical reasons, the Bakun makes it sound warmer than when you use a different amplifier. But at any rate,
the Bakun is the current amp, right?
Right, it's the current source amplifier. So
which means it delivers more current than the other amps. Is that what that means?
It means,
or it might be too technical.
Yeah, it's a very technical, but briefly, it takes a voltage signal in and outputs a current signal. And the voltage on the output is completely dependent upon the reactance and impedance of the device that it's driving. So the signal is only preserved in the current coming in the output. The voltage swings around in whatever way necessary for the current to match the input voltage signle.
And so plugging different headphones into that amp, you would hear greater differences?
If they have a non-flat impedance curve. So when I first do the test, it was with the HE800s, which have a big bump in the impedance curve, and it was pretty easy to hear it. And then the next test was with the HE1000, which is a planar magnetic headphone, which has a very flat impedance response, and it was much harder to tell the difference. But the point is that when they got to that with the HE1000s and listening to the 3 amplifiers, everybody had a very hard time telling the difference when in that blind testing protocol. Then they would start working with the amplifier, or working with the headphones, and doing the second part of the task of finding their favorite headphones and telling me which amplifiers they liked with them. So by the time they got through the headphones to figure out which they like, and then they started testing amplifiers, they'd forgotten the so-called lesson that they learned with the blind testing, that there was very little audible difference between amplifiers, and they would develop opinions rather quickly on what the amplifier sounded like. Now, the lesson that I took away from that was in a blind testing environment, there is something that causes us to be less able to develop an opinion, that less able to hear a difference. I will also say I'm a big believer that blind testing is a regimen that is very, very valid and good for people like Harmon and doing research. But I will also say it's kind of a fraught with peril for the enthusiast. I think enthusiasts should exercise it. They should use it sometimes. It's a great exercise. It does tell you that there's not as much difference as you thought. But I think what it doesn't tell you is that those small differences can make a disproportionately important difference in the subjective experience. And in the blind testing environment, those small differences don't develop that power to allow to. They don't. It makes it harder to hear that character in the amplifier, and I don't know exactly why, but I think it has to do with we as human beings want to have a relationship with something, so we have a little hook in our head. Hey, that's the head amp GSX2. Okay, now what do I think about that? And you start putting things on the hook. When you're blind testing, you sort of don't have a hook to hang stuff on, and so I think it makes it much harder. So I have a lot of respect for blind testing, and I think it's an important activity, but I also think that just normal listening, sighted evaluations is also okay, because as long as you keep your expectation biases in check, which is not easy, not hard, probably impossible, but
I would say relatively impossible, because if you're sighted, if you know what you're listening to, then you do have expectation bias. Like this one guy who came in with strong expectations, and in the blind testing, he said, I can't hear much of a difference at all. If he had started with sighted testing, I assume the result, his result would have been much different.
I think so, yeah. And that's why I thought it was a good exercise to do in the beginning. But what was interesting, here's the thing. By the end of the process, by the end of Big Sound, there was a relatively strong consensus about how the various amplifiers sounded. And blind testing would say, no, you wouldn't be able to hear that. But for example, the eddy current Black Widow, this is a kind of a very plain Jane black box, has a very kind of industrial looking external power supply. It's nothing special to look at. It's obviously a transistor amplifier, and pretty much everybody would get to that amplifier. They listen for a few minutes and they'd go, this sounds like a tube amp, and it does. It has this. I call it a meaty musicality. It really is. It's got gravitas, and yet it's also got this euphony. And
good word. Great word.
Everybody heard it. But
when they knew what they were listening to.
When they knew what they were listening to. Well, it wasn't one in the blind test, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that. But I can tell you that it would have been the same story as that amplifier.
Right.
would have been the same story. And when they did sighted stuff, they also, what was another thing, a comment that a lot of people had in common that would not be expected is that the Todd the Vinyl Junkie Teton amplifier doesn't sound like a tube amp. It sounds too clean and transparent and authoritative relative to a lot of tube amplifiers.
Even though it is a tube amp.
It's a tube amp, but it sounds very neutral and transparent. And that comment came out a lot. So, they were cited when they were doing these things. Those are two things, expectations that wouldn't have been developed that people heard in sighted mode, right? So I don't think I solved anything. In fact, I said at the beginning of this whole thing, because I know that the objectivists who like blind testing would be able to pick away at me on this thing. But here's the bottom line: is that Big Sound is not science. It was just a very complicated anecdote, and that's fine. The truth is that none of us can actually do science because it's very expensive to do science. It takes a long time. So we're left with the need to subjectively evaluate stuff. And I guess my note would be do some blind testing, because then you're going to get another perspective on what the magnitude of these differences, and will appreciate how important small differences are over time.
That's one of the nuggets here that you've taken away from this.
Yeah, small differences can make a disproportionately large difference in the subjective experience. And as an analogy, I would say it's like the burr under the saddle, or a little tiny pebble in your shoe. It can be small, but subjectively, it can be big in your head. So I think sound is like that. It'll have some small character, and it may take a while, but in the end, you'll actually, as your brain accommodates to the sound, it will find that little burr or maybe gem, and it'll be appreciated either negatively or positively more over time. So.
One of the things that one of the many posts that you did about this, and I do recommend people go to innerfidelity.com and look at the Big Sound results. There's a whole separate section on that with a lot of articles. One of them, you were talking about left brain, right brain. And I wondered what you had to say about that particular thing. And we have a graphic too called Brain. There it is.
Yeah.
How does this come into the whole system?
Well, I think it maybe is a very good illustration of the fact that this subjective and objective point of view will forever and always be separate, but will forever and always be part of the whole. It's a very difficult thing to get those two things to cross, and so that left brain, right brain thing was a lot about, when I wrote it, it was a lot about that subjective experience and how it plays with the objectively measurable phenomena.
It's so interesting because there's measurement, which is certainly an objective metric. There's blind testing, which I guess is sort of between objective and subjective. It's subjective, certainly, because you're listening and so on, but you don't know what's what. You have no chance to bring in your expectation bias or any other kind of bias. And then there's sighted listening, where you do know what you're listening to, and your objective or your subjective expectations and biases do come into play. I think it's fascinating, your whole notion of small differences can mean big differences. Small objective differences can mean big subjective differences when you're listening. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, disproportionate is
disproportionate.
The word
Great word. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they occur in two different domains. There is the objective domain, the physical world that is around us, and then there's the subjective domain of personal experience, and those two domains are completely different. Completely different. Now there's an intersection there, of course, that left brain, right brain, has cables in between.
It's called the corpus callosum.
Yeah, but they're
cables between the right and left brain. I love that.
Yeah. Hope your wiring is good.
Yeah, really.
So that's yeah. Hey, listen,
Yeah.
I just happened to see a couple things in the chat room, and I wanted to answer really quick.
Sure.
Somebody asked about the Harman response curve and said they were very interested in it. If you Google Harman response curve and then do site:"innerfidelity.com, that causes Google to search only on that site. You'll come up with, I think I've got 3 articles on it. And then somebody else asked about Bose and whether they're crap or not. Bose makes the very best noise canceling headphones. Their QC20 and QC25 are absolutely excellent, and the sound has been continuously improving. They said they had a QC3, which I agree is a terrible sounding headphone, but the newer ones, the QC15 is pretty good, but the QC25 is great for a full size one, and the QC20 is astonishing for an in-ear. So
wow.
I give Bose kudos on that.
I have the 15s, and I that's all I use on airplanes for sure.
Yeah, they're listenable, no problem.
Yeah. But otherwise, Bose, and since we're only talking headphones, we have to give kudos to Bose for those, so to speak. I find other Bose audio products to not reach that level myself. I don't know if you've ever.
Yeah, my experience is it's pretty overpriced for the sonic character it's delivering.
Yep. Sound Pro 69 was asking, do you have an opinion of the Out of Your Head software? This is a software by, is it Darren Fong?
Darren Fong, yes, indeed. In fact, I answered it in the chat room while you were on commercial, and I said, this is good. Well, just a brief answer. I said it's good stuff, but it is good stuff. It's very interesting stuff.
It basically it simulates sound outside of your head, outside of the headphones. And there are a couple of systems that do that. The Smith Realizer is probably the gold standard of that.
Right.
DTS Headphone X does it as well. And there's also this out of the head. I heard an early version of it that wasn't very convincing, but that was maybe a year ago. And since then, I'm sure Darren's gone a long way of that.
Well, you have to understand that his approach is completely different than the approach of those other folks that you mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, he puts microphones in his ears and sits in front of these systems. And basically, each of his filters is a named system. This is a 5.1 system with focal speakers and blah, blah, blah. So it's a whole physically real system that he has sat down in front of, or he has a couple of assistants in other places that do the same thing. They put microphones in their ears, and then they play some calibrated tones, signals. Maybe it's like a MLSSA signal, maximum length sequence signal. But something like that characterize the sound from each speaker, which then allows them to create a DSP filter based on what the microphones heard, and then that DSP filter becomes the filter for that channel of audio. So it's sort of like he has DSP filters that are recordings that record the character of various high-end audio systems. So you're literally listening to a real system, sort of. Which is
kind of what Smith does. Kind of what Smith does with the Realizer.
A little bit. A little bit. Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah.
Well, we are out of time, but let me ask you, AWEF in the chat room is asking, and I was intending to make this the final question. Was there a winner? Was there a headphone winner from Big Sound 2015?
Sure. The winner, numerically was the Sennheiser HD800, which has been around forever and still continues to be one of the best sounding headphones in the world. It got most of the votes. It is a modified one, and I have to say that. And there is an ANAX mod, and you can search for that on Inner Fidelity and find that. Other than that, I like this, the HE1000, in terms of its pleasurability. This is maybe the most pleasant headphone I've ever heard. You remember that commercial of the little snuggly bear falling into the clouds of toilet paper?
Yes.
That's kind of like what these sound. You just lay back and relax and enjoy them. They're just the most comfy, cozy. And then in terms of the amplifiers, I would say the head amp was probably the leader, but there was a lot more distribution of opinions on the amplifiers than there was on the headphones.
Okay. And Bob Katz, I read some of his stuff on coverage of this, and he's a big Stax 007 fan, I think, and he was amazed at, you had a pair of Chinese headphones there that were a couple $100 that he was amazed at.
That's the Noontech Zorro.
Noontech Zorro.
Yeah. It's a $79 headphone. It's a terrific little headphone.
Wow. Really amazing. Well, for much more on this, you can go to innerfidelity.com and look for Big Sound. And there's a whole section there, right, Tyll?
I think it's got a section of its own at the bottom of the page. I'd have to take a look. The last post is on the second page in from the homepage now. The last Big Sound post. So you can just scroll down to the bottom, go to the next page, and scroll down. You'll find that, and then you can click on where it says Big Sound underneath the title, and you can pull up all the Big Sound posts. But I think there is a category established for it.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely go there to read much, much more about this wonderful experiment that Tyll did. And also, about all kinds of other headphones, anything related to headphones, really. The Wall of Fame. I don't know if you maintain a wall of shame or not, but.
No, I don't.
You don't. But just as well, yeah.
Yeah, but if you read the updates, if you do the Google search for update on innerfidelity.com, the site innerfidelity.com, you get all my updates, and that's where I publish after I first measure the headphone, and somebody asked me at RMAF, I love those updates. I don't know why, and I said, it's because it's the only place where I say headphones are bad. So if you want to find out bad headphones, you can go to any of my updates.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here and spending an hour with us. Really do appreciate it.
I love doing it, Scott. I always enjoy being on your show.
Well, we always love having you here, too. In fact, you are one of the most popular guests on the show, so it'll happen again, I am sure.
Love to do it.
Great. So that's innerfidelity.com. Don't forget that. You can also find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, I'll be doing a chat room Q&A, so be sure to get your questions ready. I'll be joined by my colleague Mark Henninger, who will have just returned from the Toronto Audio Video Entertainment Show. So there'll be plenty of high-end audio to talk about from his experience there, and I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.